Thank you very much for joining us for this lunch conversation, Virtual Rubicon Governing Digital Frontiers. It's my pleasure to invite and welcome our speakers. Please welcome our speakers as they come up on stage. Athanasios Dokos, National Security Advisor, Greece. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, former Union Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology, Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, and Jal Shakti, India. Carl Pei, Chief Executive Officer, Nothing, United Kingdom. Erin Saltman, Senior Director of Membership and Programs, Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, United Kingdom. And our moderator, Pranjal Sharma, Economic Analyst and Author, India. Over to you, Pranjal.
Thanks for joining us today. It's a discussion on a topic that impacts everyone, all of us at an individual and institutional level. We are living in a world where borders don't seem to matter anymore. National borders, corporate borders, personal space borders. So one of the questions that we're going to be looking at, I mean, there are several questions, but what we need to look at is how do we manage security in an era of rapidly vanishing borders? Technology is bringing us together in many ways, but sometimes removing those borders also creates as much complication. I think there's a trilemma of sorts that we have to address. One is about the supply chain and hardware, because you don't always have full faith in hardware as we used to earlier. We also look at issues of personal space. Personal space is disappearing. You don't know what is private, what is public. It's being constantly redefined. National security becomes a very important issue. Enterprise security, national security, personal security, and wrapped up in all that is tech sovereignty. Everybody wants to be in charge of what they're doing. So again, while technology is bringing us together, it is also creating the need for creating more walls. So I'm going to request our very eminent and experienced panel to share their views, and I'd like to get some thoughts from all of you in the audience as well. I'm going to begin with you, Erin. I'm going to ask you from an anti-terrorist perspective. You have been working in various countries. Is technology enabling terrorism, or is it being able to tackle it? Where is the fight today?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. I mean, the short and academic answer is both. And, working with 32 companies around the world, big and small, your big ones, your Microsofts, your Googles, your Airbnbs, your Zooms, your Metas, but also very small ones like Just Paste It based in Poland or Yubo and Dailymotion based in France. You really see that when we think of the internet, it's very heterogeneous. And when you think of harms, anything that you are normally doing on your phone is something a bad actor is using the phone for or the laptop for the same reasons. Like, raise your hand if you have just one app on your phone. You working with MI5? No. There's maybe one app. Most of us don't. Raise your hand if you think you have over 100 apps on your phone. And there's probably a little bit of a geographic and an age difference in who I'm looking at that has over 100 apps on their phone. So we take for granted that the technology, but also the harm, is both transnational and cross-platform. So
it's also possible for somebody to put an app in your phone without you knowing it.
We'll get into that. Well, the idea with violent extremist and terrorist groups, that's more maybe state-led. We'll maybe get to that on this panel. I think when we talk about legislative frameworks and harms and the right path, I think there's this constant struggle. There's kind of three main things. One, there's a real lack of a global unified approach to dealing with online harms. And we are seeing there's a huge appetite for legislation. And looking at it just through the lens of working with a bunch of tech companies on counterterrorism, they come to us and they'll say, so what does terrorism mean? How do I define it? How do I apply that to my platform. And first of all, no governments have a really agreed upon definition of terrorism. Everyone's lists look different. And even a designation list, I can tell the history of a country by who they have prescribed as terrorists. So being based a lot in the UK, I can look and see Irish group, Irish group, Irish group, Islamist, 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 white supremacy group, Islamist. That tells a lot about a history and what terrorism might look like. It's very hard for a tech company then to say, what is my global definition of terrorism for a platform? We also see that that appetite for legislation means that there are these divergence goals. So some new legislation is demanding content removal of certain types, while other legislation is very much protecting that similar type of content. Some require access to data, whereas privacy legislation is forcing user data to become inaccessible. Some is looking to make the tech platform the culpable agent, whereas other laws are looking at making the user doing the harm the culpable agent. None of these are in and of themselves bad, but those types of legislations are actually starting to contradict each other in different parts of the world, and it's very hard for one platform to know how to comply on a global level. So you're already seeing, in some cases, and we talked about this during the lunch, geo-blocking or geo-fencing as a tactic to try to still work globally while complying with the law. The second point is that we do see the trend of more authoritative regimes prioritizing security over things like free speech or privacy. And so we're starting to see what might look like almost digital colonialism, where in some parts of the world, you as a user, what you can access, what you can see, and how your data might be used for or against you is not up to you as much. So if I'm based in Europe, my data is much more private. Again, pros and cons to that if for a security reason you need to access it. But in other parts of the world, that data can be used and tracked, and I might not always have visibility. Transparency is not always applicable. And then lastly, we do see this obstacle faced by global tech companies, that there is no UN for the internet. So even though the UN has made statements that access to the internet is akin to a human right at this point, there is no body that tells you what baseline free speech looks like, baseline privacy, baseline security. So everyone's having to draw a slightly different line in the sand. And we are very cause and effect. So after Cambridge Analytica, after Snowden revelations, there were pushes in some parts of the world for mass privacy. And then you get child exploitation cases, terrorist cases, and then there's pushes for more access and security. So I think there's a very heterogeneous landscape. We are already seeing less of this ocean of equitable space online, and you're already starting to see users and companies that are going to have to feel and look different in different parts of the world.
Thanks, Erin. Rajiv, I'm going to come to you as a minister. A lot of people have seen you and heard you as a policymaker, as a member of parliament, but many of you would be pleasantly surprised to know that he was a coder. He started his career as a tech geek, if I were, and he also was among the first companies to launch mobile networks in India. So you've seen the journey of India's mobile revolution, where you have more than 1 billion people connected online. But it's also creating the digital space into a war zone of sorts. From a policy perspective, Rajiv, how do you see governments, especially in India, looking at this?
So thank you for having me, Pranjal. And look, I think it's a safe assumption, conclusion to make that as innovation has progressed rapidly over the last 2.5 decades, government and government's role in that has lagged. So to your first question that Erin answered, I think we can safely conclude today, and without anybody contradicting anybody, that we are obviously in a very vibrant, exciting time as far as tech goes. More and more people are connected and have access to applications and more intelligent applications. But what has lagged is the conversation about what does the government have to do to make sure that this space, the cyberspace, the internet, whatever you want to call it, a safe and trusted place where the laws of the land that are supposed to safeguard citizens, empower citizens, are also delivered on the internet. So I think it is a fairly well acknowledged fact today by governments all over the world that governments haven't done enough. And to the point that Erin made, I think there needs to be at some point a global protocol or a global understanding on what this cyberspace should look like vis-a-vis the citizens that of each country that consume it and use it for business and their life. In India, we have in 2021 put forth the principles that the internet, and indeed anything on the internet, which is not just social media but also today's AI, should be safe and trusted. And therefore, it is not about saying, no, we want you to be safe and trusted, please do it. It should be legally defined guardrails that is legislated, that provides a very transparent and a very predictable playground for anybody who's an innovator to build innovation, but at the same time, respect the laws of the land and ensure that nobody is prejudiced and nobody is harmed. One of these pieces of this framework is the personal data protection law. And I think in many ways, India has shown to the world that innovation and citizens' rights are not binaries. And there is no choice that needs to be made, because the European model, with great respect to them, has argued, or at least attempted to argue, that this is a choice that needs to be made, that a citizen isn't safe unless you shut down or put the brakes on innovation, even if it's not explicitly said. So we have demonstrated that we can have innovation, we can grow, we can continue to innovate, create digital economic growth, but at the same time ensure that the internet is a place where the laws of the land do apply. But going forward, Pranjal, I'm very clear, unless there is a global understanding that the definition of free speech in India is very different from what the US sees it, that some countries have much more restrictive free speeches in their constitution and in the law, and that is understood, and there is no one-shoe-fits-all model that is imposed on the consumers, the netizens of the world, that understanding has to evolve. How it will evolve, I don't know. But I think that kind of a global protocol must happen for this to really come home, to become a reality.
Thanks, Rajiv. Thanos, if I could come to you from a national security perspective, and I know that the national security advisors of several countries met in Delhi a few days ago. So I'm sure this was one of the thoughts that came across. But digital frontier is the new frontier for war. You don't need troops and boots on the ground. You don't need tanks. In some cases, you don't even need these long-range missiles. You just need the right kind of hacker to enter systems. How much prepared are NSAs, or perhaps from your own experience, in managing this absolute threat to national sovereignty?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm relieved that Raisina has this policy of serving lunch before the discussion. It can get uncomfortable if discussion goes on for too long and people start giving you the evil eye because they're hungry. But I must confess that I am constantly facing two challenges. One is people my age are basically analog.
Thanos, could you hold it closer?
Yeah, so people my age are basically analog. So I'm trying to digitalize as much as I can, but I'm always falling behind technology. Second problem is for government officials and especially security professionals, it's a struggle to make the mental transition that you described, that the security environment is no longer just physical. It's no longer about territory, land, air, water, but there is also an important digital dimension with significant threats. So this is a struggle. People are trying to adapt, but it's not easy. And let us remember that one of the basic characteristics, one of the basic requirements of a state over the centuries is to have control over territory. Otherwise, you are either under occupation or a weak or failed state. But there's a new reality now, and people are beginning to realize that, with very few exceptions, if any, all countries are vulnerable, digitally vulnerable. There are significant threats, and states and now an increasing number of non-state actors are using digital methods, cyber methods, to either destabilize governments, influence elections, spread all kind of disinformation, to promote radicalization, facilitate
So
terrorist acts.
I would assume, Thanos, and maybe Erin will also add to it, I assume that you don't need so many, spies anymore across the world, but what you would need is more digital surveillance and trying to be ahead of all the, non-state actors who are trying to harm your country and trying to figure out which part of the dark web or which new app they're using which you don't have access to.
Well, the problem is, you said we don't need soldiers anymore. The problem is we need both. I mean, there's still significant physical threats, so we need the old infrastructure, but there are new threats, so we need to add the digital, troops and methods of protection. And unfortunately, with open sources of information, of intelligence, you can go a long way, but you still need someone to snoop around and get the last bit of information that will help you understand what's going on.
Erin, I'll come to you, but let me come to Carl if you're ready, Carl. Because today, if somebody wants to do harm to anybody, first thing they do is switch off their phone. Okay, I'm off the grid. I've switched off my phone, and now I can get away by almost doing anything. I won't say nothing, but anything. Mm-hmm. So, Carl, in your view, how much of this security is an important concern for a technology and a device maker like yourself? I know you said you were a small company, but it's not just about you. It's about the entire industry and the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the way we think about it is that we just have to follow the local laws and regulations in the different countries that we operate in. And the only hope that we have is that the information is transparent, it's easy for us to access, easy for us to action on, and it's fair, meaning that, as a startup company, we already have a lot of different cards stacked against us. For instance, when we buy supplies from the component suppliers, we already have to pay a much higher cost. So this is just one example, but in every field of a startup, it's just more difficult to operate. When it comes to the talent market, it's harder for us to get the best talent because there's higher risk being associated with our company. So when it comes to regulatory stuff, we're super happy to comply. We're going to be very nimble, but the only thing we want is that it applies to everybody, and we can really level the playing field when we're trying to compete for the market. And we will try and work harder than everybody else, because as a smaller company, we do have to do that in order to compete. I think perhaps another consideration is that for a younger company, we're not able to invest as much in our infrastructure when it comes to policy and the regulatory side of the business. We're very concerned about how do we gain market share, how do we make consumers love our products. So the more simple and straightforward these things can be, the easier it will be for us to also compete in the market, because we're not able to build such a big team at this stage.
That's a great point, actually, Carl. And Erin, maybe you could address this. Simple and straightforward, because complications or complicating the regulatory structures don't always make things easier. But there is still that challenge. How do you propose that policymakers and companies engage on this?
Yeah, I mean, I work with the tech companies, so it's hard enough to boss the tech companies around. That's my job. It's not my job to boss governments around, but I'm always happy to tell them what to do, and they can take it or leave it. I do think, because we've seen so many case studies of legislation that has come out in the last few years targeting online services, I will say what broadly makes for better legislation and worse legislation, and I'll try not to call out people. But good legislation is when governments govern and let the tech decide what the tech solution for it is. Sometimes you get legislation where governments are trying to tech the solution, and by the time it takes a year, 3 years to get that legislation over the line, the technology has moved on. So if a government can be extremely clear about what the goal of that legislation is, and then force the companies to work back on what that technical solution might be, and have multi-stakeholder discussions in that process, that is helpful. I would also always recommend having some human rights experts in the room. I myself, looking to counter terrorism, could be like, well, I can do this and counter all the terrorism, and that might be at the cost of journalists' posts and academic posts. Academics share terrorist content all the time, please stop. And so, you don't want to over-censor at the cost of a security measure either. So having really clear goals for the legislation and then working backwards on the technology, let the tech and let the govern is very important. And then just to bring in some, so I'm usually the Debbie Downer because I'm the terrorism person, counterterrorism person. Just to talk for tech companies, we've been talking a lot about artificial intelligence and it's been hinted at here. Tech companies have been using AI and machine learning models to counter terrorism and harms for over 10 years. And so it's not all doom and gloom. And actually, the technology really does help tech companies get at the scale and speed of how harm might travel in really innovative ways. And some very specific ones, just to make people understand that it's not just a lost cause out there. I mean, the cross-platform tooling, we run a hash sharing database, for example, that shares hashes of content. And so one company can share signal without sharing personally identifiable information with the group, and then every other company can see if that same content that has been labeled as terrorism has been shared on their platform. So it's an amplifier of one piece of content being turned into possibly 1,000 signals of terrorist content on other platforms. Or strategic network disruptions, just how law enforcement might map a bad actor network and then shut them down. Instead of doing a whack-a-mole approach of taking down piecemeal pieces of content, threat investigators are working with the technology to map a whole network of bad actors and take them down all at once, which makes it much harder for them to reform. Or recidivism technology, so that if it's the same bad actor trying to repeat come onto a platform, the technology can detect it. Or even linguistic processing, which we've talked about in different chats throughout the Raisina dialogues, are there to help you understand language. So 10 years ago, there was a lot of criticism, 5 years ago even, that, well, if you don't have local language experts in every country in the world, you can't moderate. But actually now the linguistic translations are getting better and better, even with slang and dialects and smaller languages, making moderation at scale a lot easier. And there's even people in this room that have been working on, and I'm pleased to work with some of them and hoping to work with others. We've been talking about AI chatbots that can actually do intervention models and help maybe pull people away from extremism and radicalization. I know Mythos Labs is in this room right now. Go find him during your coffee break. And so that's actually not just counterterrorism, but engagement models where the technology is working with the people to identify bad signal, remove it more proactively at scale, and even move into a counter-extremism space where you can redirect people away from really harmful networks.
Language is a good point. You know, by the way, I don't know if many of you have seen, but the latest trend right now is that all the Indians are trying to teach Grok the swear words in various Indian languages. So, you know, you ask a question, Grok comes up with all these Indian language words which we would not use in any civilized company. So, you know, that's how citizens tend to get their revenge on AI bots. You know, you refer to a UN for internet, but given the fact that UN is being questioned so much, I may not want to use that phrase anymore. But I think, Rajiv and Thanos, I'd like to ask you that we need some kind of global cooperation and regulation, because there's a global digital space, there's a national digital space, and there's a personal digital space. So we're really looking at 3 levels of digital spaces, each of which can be weaponized, can be compromised, and therefore impacting innovation and our daily lives. So what would you say should be the approach to get collaboration and regulation at these 3 levels?
Well, I must say most governments have been panicking because they feel they lost control over their digital space. So those that they can are trying to create those digital frontiers. And then, you know, the predators are using that in 2 ways. One is for weaponizing, as you mentioned, but also defending their digital space. The rest of us, you know, so-called victims or potential victims are trying to defend. And the dilemma here is that if you don't regulate, then national security, social stability, and social cohesion will suffer. If you regulate too much, then innovation and freedom of speech will be affected. So one needs to find the right mix. And to do that, we need not only government cooperation, but also we need to involve the all the stakeholders, private sector, everyone who has a say and a role in that business. But then the other problem, talking about regulation, and my co-panelists know much more than I do about possible models. The American one, too little interference, the European one, somewhere in the middle, the Chinese one, over-regulate and control. But then the other problem we have is that it will be very difficult to come up with some kind of global model because when asked to define the concept of democracy, then you will get many different answers. Same thing about civil rights, about what is blasphemous and acceptable in one society. Definitions may vary considerably. So it looks like we'll end up with several models. Countries will choose the one that is closer to their own beliefs and values. And at the end, my concern, my fear is that we will end up with a digital world that will be as fragmented as the physical one.
Thank you. Rajiv, your thoughts?
Yep. So, Pranjal, this is obviously a topic on which I've thought about and spoken about quite a bit. And let me just say, we should agree that there has to be some sort of a multi-jurisdictional understanding. And I'll explain to you why.
At each of the three levels.
Yeah. And if you just take cyber crime for a minute, 85%, and we've done the study in India, 85% of all cyber crime / incidents are multi-jurisdictional, where the victim is in one jurisdiction, the perpetrator is in a second jurisdiction, and sometimes the consequences are in a third jurisdiction. So by the very nature of this, you can come to a very commonsensical conclusion that unless the three jurisdictions cooperate, the perpetrator of the crime or the incident will never be brought to book. I mean, just common sense. Now comes, how do we achieve this and how do we do this? I will certainly tell you the United Nations is not the way to go. I mean, on that, okay. Let's be very clear.
Okay, so there's some agreement on that.
Yeah, I think in 2010, there are a few countries in the world that attempted to take regulation of the internet from the ICANN to a body called the UN SERP. We opposed it, India opposed it, and that fell through. Certainly United Nations is not the one. Just to take up what Thanos said just now, I don't think we should believe that it is possible in the near term for all countries around the world to get all warm and huggy and fuzzy about it and agree to some global protocol. It's not going to happen. I think something else is possibly much more realizable, which is that certain countries, especially democracies, that see the threat, see the challenges through a common prism, will start collaborating on creating some protocols. And what will end up happening is you will have these corridors of trust built between like-minded countries who agree to cooperate rather than the entire global internet. And that is much more doable. That is a conversation that many countries are already having. The NSA levels are having it. The digital regulators are having it. But let's be clear that innovation will continue to gallop and will continue to outpace anybody's imagination, and that is just a fact of life. That is a normal that we live in. But governments have to step up and not just be mute spectators to this. They have to create these light touch but very clearly defined regulations and guardrails. It is an obligation on their part, a duty on their part to their citizens that they do this. I agree with one point that Erin made, that when governments tend to get prescriptive over the guardrails, they will fail. Because by the time a government wraps its head around what is the prescription and how it works, the technology has moved ahead. So it is to be principle-led. These protocols are issues that we can have countries that are democracies start discussing. And maybe the whole world doesn't join in the bandwagon, but some countries start and take the start and move in that direction and create this model of corridors of trust or groups of trust, as we are seeing also in the supply chains.
like a coalition of trust. So, Erin, I'll come to you, but I'd like to get some thoughts from you. Maybe have some mics in the audience, please. If you can have the team ready with the mics, I'm going to request you to share your thoughts. But Erin, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just 2 words on this. I think for many tech companies, and for newer tech companies coming into the scene as well, and I was pleased to find out I do own a nothing phone. It's really good, it's great. For smaller and medium companies coming into this space, they are already facing 10 years of what has become a lot of negative clout towards the tech-government relationship. And actually, to fully understand the harms that we're looking at, you do need a lot of dialogue between what platforms are seeing as threat signal and what law enforcement sees, what civil society being affected on the ground sees. And again, talking just from looking at counterterrorism and counter-extremism, a platform can only see what's on its specific platform. But as we pointed out at the beginning of this session, we're all using multiple platforms. We're sharing on one platform a link out to a third-party platform. We're saying, oh, this is public, but I'll have a private chat with you over here on WhatsApp. And so even understanding harm signal is spread across platforms. So governments we do need the time to rebuild a little bit of trust just so that threat intelligence can be shared between the sectors a little bit better, and also to bring in experts. I mean, we've been working with ORF and have had people like Kabir in the room contribute insights to make sure that we share those with tech companies, because a lot of times experts and their knowledge isn't reaching the tech companies that they are criticizing and finding bad content on. And so actually we do need to bridge that gap. And then to the point of, I don't think we're gonna find one definition of terrorism to rule them all. There's millions of PhDs written about it. We're not gonna find one perfect line in the sand between this dilemma of privacy, free speech, and security. However, I would love governments, again, not my job to tell them what to do, but if you're taking notes, just define the edges of the puzzle for us. Like, what is the bare minimum that we need to comply with for privacy for users? And what is indefensible as curtailing free speech, and what are some basic guidelines that we cannot go beneath for safety and security? And so just defining the edges of the puzzle allows us to draw different lines within that puzzle framework, but we're not gonna probably find one rule to rule them all. It will be the edging that companies are looking for that.
Carl, please.
We talked a lot about safety and security today, and I think it's very important. However, I would just like to provide a slightly different point of view on things. Like, safety and security is important, but it's about covering the downside, right? But I think we should also think about how technology can drive upside for society and for humanity. If we think about the past history of technology, it's always been an accelerator of human potential. Technology has always enabled us to do way more than we could do before. However, if you think about our industry that we're in the smartphone industry, this is basically the next product after the personal computer, right? When the personal computer first came about, computers were very big, difficult to use, only for government, only for military. But the personal computing revolution put a computer on everybody's desk and really democratized this device for more people to manifest their creativity out into the real world. Okay, now we fast forward to today, and the main personal computer is a smartphone, but it's just so far away from that original accelerator of human potential. So as we talk about the downside protection, safety and security, I think we should also kind of revisit the position of what a smartphone should be. Should it really just be this machine that we use to scroll on these infinite social media feeds whilst we keep the user safe and to not see harmful content? Or is there a way to once again make the smartphone an accelerator of human potential? And I do believe that there's a lot of opportunities in doing so in this era, with all these new technologies coming down the line.
That's a great point. I think accelerator of innovation is a great point, but within, again, in a safe, secure place. Yes, sir, I can see hands over here. So let me go to the gentleman in the front, the lady over here. Let me collect a couple of questions and come back to you. Sure, please introduce yourself, and you can keep it sharp. I can get more questions. Go ahead, please. Is the mic on? Please, can you confirm if the mic is on? I always find there's a need for a voice-activated mic, Somebody
There's
needs
an
to
app for
develop
that.
that.
We can get that.
We still can't hear you. Are you sure you're not on mute?
Try yelling, yeah.
Sorry, you have a...
Okay, perfect. Okay, I don't have to yell. So, okay, my name is Julian Ringhoff. I work for the European Commission on online platform regulation and the international aspects of it. And I wonder, you were all kind of saying that we need an international framework to address online problems, for example, when it comes to hate speech or terrorist content online. At the same time, you admitted that, of course, the understanding of what terrorism is and what freedom of speech means is very different around the world. So what does it mean? How can a global framework then look like? And let me note that some relevant UN agencies like UNESCO has actually published something on this, guiding principles on platform regulation. So I'm wondering, is that not enough, or what do you actually want to see given these contradictions in basically what you want to have and what's possible?
Sure, thank you. The lady here, and then I'll come to the gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Gayatri. I am a research scholar at Rudra, that is a Rural Data Research Analysis, IIT Bombay. I would like to ask, how we can integrate special technologies and open source platform that has to be, supported and given a lot of importance nowadays, because with the help of these we can also reach each and every sector of the society, and it will be also economically viable and beneficial to all the sectors of the societies and to the marginalized groups also.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Some of
thank
the
you.
answers may be required to be given offline because we may not have the time for a detailed answer because your question is actually pretty deep. Yes, sir.
So my name is Raghav, and I work with PwC. Just a question, which is, how do you see nation states, being relevant in an age of AI when a chatbot would, kind of spring up a certain cybersecurity threat, and you really don't know which chatbot it is, where is it sprung, how is that threat going to come your way? So how relevant are going to be nation states in that kind of an era? That's my question.
Thank you. That's a deeply philosophical question. The gentleman there with the glasses behind you. Yes, please, sir.
Hi, sir. Greetings from Kavya. I'm from Pandit.
Hang on. I asked this gentleman. I can't see who's speaking right now. Yeah, please stand up. Yeah.
My name is Madalitso Piri. I'm a research fellow from South Africa, or based in South Africa. My question is just around the policing of data mining companies that rely on what was actually referred to on the platform as digital colonialism. And what are the...
Can you hold the mic closer to you?
Okay, yeah. So what are the regulatory frameworks for managing super commodified companies that rely on the exploitation of people that mine data and collect data that get exposed to harmful images and all of that are beneficial to most of us who consume things.
Sure, thank you. Got that. The gentleman right at the back, I'll take your question, then we'll come back for a second round.
Thank you. Hi, greetings from Kavya. I work around nuclear energy policy associated with Pandit Deendayal Energy University. I have a question regarding, given the advancements of quantum technology, how we are policy-wise and tech-wise addressing the cryptographic threat associated with it. Also, are nations primarily investing in quantum capabilities to achieve superiority in information warfare, or it is a focus on ensuring that no adversary gains on the unconsented strategic edge?
This could be a subject for a PhD, so I don't think we have the time for answering. But again, I'm going to request and come to the panel and give a short take. But again, reminding you that the panel is available offline and you could have personal discussions. Thanos, may I request you to begin? You can respond to any or all of the questions very briefly.
4 bullet type reactions. First of all, about the relevance of governments in an AI world. I hope I will be retired by then, so just need a few more years. Secondly, when it comes to big tech, this is a bipolar world, US and China, and that is making a lot of countries uncomfortable, including European countries. Third point, I sympathize with the idea of lowest common denominator, as the only thing that might work. unfortunately, in the EU, we have a bad experience because lowest common denominator sometimes amounts to very little. Last point, I also like the idea of corridors of like-minded countries, because let me make the analogy to supply chains. It used to be global supply chains. Over the past few years has been about shorter, more secure supply chains, friend-shoring. So one could apply the same logic to digital corridors. Why not even security corridors between like-minded countries? Hoping that maybe later on there will be opportunities for something broader that will cover much, if not all, of the globe.
Thank you. Rajiv?
I think there was a question about why, if UNESCO has already put out some guidelines, why are we not following them? The fact is, they are not law. If you have lots of people out there saying, thou art better off if you do this, the big tech platforms are not going to listen to you. When I talk about a global protocol or a protocol across trusted nations, it's about the laws in those countries reflecting that protocol. And that platforms are therefore required to be compliant across laws across a group of countries. Just having people stand around and say guidelines is exactly what big tech companies love, which is that you can evangelize and pontificate as much as you want, but we will keep redoing the social charter and the social contract the way we like it. So that's my answer to that question. Open source, absolutely on the money, that question. In the context of AI, there is a clear battle today where there are big companies that are not interested in open source AI. And I was in a recent panel where somebody actually very openly said, we are against open source AI. And that person or people who subscribe to the thought are people who don't understand the history of tech. There used to be an MS-DOS, and then there was Linux and Unix. The history of tech is that open source will prevail, and anybody who tries to put the brakes on it and try and say open source should not be permitted will fail. So we are completely, at least I am very, very clear that in the emerging AI world as well, open source is going to be very relevant. Will nation states matter? It must. It is the narrative of the big tech that boundaries don't matter, nation states don't matter, laws don't matter, and only the guidelines in Fremont or San Francisco matter. And it is for countries that have laws and that have democracies like us to say, no, we have a different view. The internet is ubiquitous, the internet is boundaryless, but there is in every country something called sovereign law. Every country is a sovereign nation, and therefore the nation states will continue to prevail if countries wake up to the challenges that the current technology framework represents. Data mining, look, that is what AI is about. It is about using data that is available publicly to train models. It is what data mining used to be 10 years ago. And it's very important today. There are legislations that protect personal data from being used again without consent. That is what our law, DPDP, and I recommend, I'm giving you some free endorsement of our own law. It's an excellent law, and I think you will find that it's very, very principle-led, and I think that's the way to go. There is a gap in the law across the world about what do we do to publicly available data from being mined or from being utilized or for being used to train models. And that is being played out in the courts in New York and being courts in India about, does an AI company have the right to use publicly available data to train its model and monetize? Quantum tech, look, 5 years from now, the world will change again, and quantum is going to change it. Encryption as we know it will have to be redesigned, rebuilt. Computing as we know will be completely reimagined. So I think that is certainly something out there in the future. Not too many people know about it in detail to try and comment on or try and predict what would be the framework of computing in the world of quantum, so I will not go down that road. But accepting to say it is certainly a very, very disruptive, emerging challenge to computing and the internet as we know it today.
Thank you, Rajiv. Carl?
Perhaps I'll start with the EU-related question. As a EU citizen myself, I feel somewhat close to that question. I think it boils down to avoiding concentration risk on a platform level, first and foremost, because if you think about our industry, there's two big platforms operating. It's iOS and Android. I think the EU has been doing a good job in terms of trying to make the competition more fair, trying to remove some of the anti-competitive natures of these platforms. However, Europe doesn't really have any counterbalance to any of these platforms. Both are American. And in the last 10, 20 years, I think Europe has really taken a backseat to tech innovation around the world. A group of entrepreneurs in Europe, including me, we tried to recently do something about it. We have a project called Project Europe. We're trying to fund the next generation of young entrepreneurs. Hopefully that will bring some change. And perhaps I would just like to share a very near-term possibility where these platforms will be disrupted, and that's through Gen AI. If you think about it, the biggest moat that iOS and Android currently has is their developer ecosystem. The reason why we're not able to build an operating system is not because we can't from a technical perspective, it's because it's going to be so difficult to build all the ecosystem for developers, all the apps and stuff. We're now seeing the emergence of AI coding. Anybody who can prompt a LLM can now generate an app or a software. And in the future, it will be even more seamless. You can just speak to your phone and suddenly an app will pop up in your phone. I think this technology will really democratize the creation of software. It will really build a lot of new developer ecosystems because everybody can now be a developer. And as a result of that, the current two biggest platforms will lose one of their most strongest moats. So that's kind of my take on the EU-related question. On the data mining question, I think it's all a matter of transparency. I think consumers can understand if you need to collect some data, if you explain clearly what they're going to get out of it, what you intend to do with it. If you create a dashboard where they can see all the data that you currently have on them, when you collected it and what you're going to use it for, and allow them on a granular level to delete that data when they don't want to share it anymore. So I think it's not necessarily about not collecting the data, but rather being upfront about it, transparent about it, and making the experience very user-friendly if they don't want to be a part of it anymore.
Thank you. But I also heard, Carl, that we're going to enter an era where you'll have a virtual assistant, most likely based on Gen AI, and you won't need an app anymore. So we are also going to be heading towards an app-less world. So when you asked about one app or 100 app, I think we may have a zero-app world coming up soon. Erin?
I mean, I think we're there. I was writing an email the other day, and my colleague said, you might want to make it a little more human. Here's the version ChatGPT made for you. And I was like, damn, that sounds better. And I'm like, where am I at? So maybe, yes, make me more human. I'm here for it. I think a couple points. The European Commission question, the UN guiding principles are actually very important. Anyone want bedtime reading? Have a look. We actually, to join us, because we're doing very sensitive counterterrorism work across platforms, you actually have to have a baseline human rights commitment that's public, baseline transparency reporting, and clear terms of service. All of that came from UNGP framing, and we actually give training to tech companies. So if they try to join us and they don't meet some of that criteria, we work with an entity, BSR, on training through the UNGPs as what that baseline might look like, even for smaller tech companies. So that guiding principles are really good because they address both requirements that we might want for bigger tech companies that have more resources as well as smaller ones. And then to your point of international frameworks versus national ones, it's what I stated before of the international frameworks just needs to give us the edge so that we can all kind of tussle around in the middle, understanding cultural nuances, and it is completely fair that different countries will have different priorities, but the edges need to be internationally agreed on. We don't have a UN for the internet. So I mean, if someone wants to raise their hand and maybe Samir can fund us making that next year, then I don't know. On the point of open source, one really clear case study. Photo and video matching, the hash sharing matching that I talked about, was invented through photo and video DNA for countering child exploitation. So actually, counterterrorism learned from countering child exploitation. However, it was only open source technology if you were using it for countering child exploitation. So if you wanted to use photo DNA for countering terrorism, you would have to pay a lot for it. But we were managing small and medium companies as well. We worked with Meta to open source their photo and video matching technologies, PDQ and TMK, which are now open source on GitHub. And that has allowed a bunch of other companies that otherwise wouldn't have been able to license that or develop it themselves to apply and use that technology. So that's how you see very practical use cases of getting at harm through shared cross-platform open source. And on the digital colonialism, we are seeing that. So again, without this framework of best practices for our edges, we are already seeing that your data feels different. I'm based in Europe, so there's DSA, there's GDPR, there's e-privacy. My data is going to be treated differently than other parts of the world, what it is allowed to be used for. And so using privacy laws, IP laws, transparency laws, that will be really helpful, but that doesn't exist everywhere. And then on quantum technology, the biggest immediate issues will be, as mentioned, encryption, that all your encryption could just immediately be broken, and passwords, that all your passwords are pretty much obsolete. But we're already all being trained by our technology to use 2- and even 3-factor authentication. You can see there's a lot of people that are only focused on the preservation of passwords and encryption, and your technology is kind of already training you in that direction of being resilient when that quantum technology comes. There's a million other things we could talk about quantum, but that's for a few more PhDs.
Sure. Before I can, Joel, I just want to check with you, how much time do we have? Because watch says one thing, but do we have a few minutes, or how much time do we have? 5 more minutes? Okay, so let's get questions. I can see, green shoots of hands. There was a lady there who I saw who had raised her hand earlier, but I don't know where she is. But okay, the gentleman over here. Yes, please go ahead. Keep it very brief, please.
My name is Adyat Verma, and my question will be direct. Carl, I have been followed your journey since OnePlus, and with nothing, you have built a brand that challenges the status quo. In an era where the data privacy is a growing concern, what concrete security innovations has nothing introduced to protect users, and how do you ensure that the current organization of yours doesn't follow the same data practices as larger tech giants do? I mean, someone has to set a more functional benchmark, especially app tracking users' activity for advertisements and AI integration with the user interface like ChatGPT.
Some of these questions are like essays. You guys are terrific with the deep questions. Okay, we'll have one question from him. Keep it short, please.
So from those days of horse to sleighs via Tesla, it's human who drove or steered technology. Since our honorable minister is an Intel's insider, I would like to make him addressee. My first question is, there's a theoretical line. It goes FANG, F-A-A-N-G. I'm sure he's aware of. It's the Facebook Amazon.
What's your question? Please be sharp. We have 30 seconds.
Is it a myth or a monolithic norm that these are the a set of companies which makes the algorithm runs the world? And number two,
no, one question only, please. Sorry, I'll have to pause you here. We'll take one question from the gentleman at the back. We have to get more thoughts in, and then again, a quick response from you,
Hello,
Carl.
sir.
And yes, please introduce yourself.
Raghav Sharma, this side, founder, Skillo Nation Heads, and from IIT Jodhpur. Quick question. Tech building to tech adaptation. What should be the possible policy reforms to avoid leakages and threats? Should we govern the disruption? If yes, then where we should keep the cap or the bar?
Okay, again, I'm getting a lot of PhD thematic ideas here, so I don't know if we can answer, but quickly, Thanos and Rajiv and Carl.
Right, a quick point about regulation. So the ancient Greeks had this obsession about avoiding extreme actions or behaviors. So, digital protectionism or digital authoritarianism can be as problematic as political authoritarianism or economic protectionism. And digital anarchy can be also quite harmful. So I think we need to find the middle ground between those two extremes.
Thank you. Rajiv?
So I think the question was about algorithms. And certainly, yes, I think there is a lack of transparency on algorithms. There is clearly a growing debate in trying to get more visibility on how these models are being trained. Are there biases being trained? Are they building in biases? Are they training them with actually high quality data sets? How authentic are the outputs of these platforms? So these are all, in my opinion, very, very important questions as we see technology grow and disrupt. But these questions are being asked, and I don't think the answers that we are getting today are satisfactory. And that is why I keep sort of harping that there has to be a framework where platforms are accountable for these kind of issues, and legally accountable, not just accountable from a point of view of you're a good boy if you say it and you're a bad boy if you don't. It has to be something that countries evolve as a framework for all these platforms are incentivized for good conduct and disincentivized against bad conduct.
Thank you. Carl, very specific question, nothing but you can give a brief answer and answer more later.
I think so far we've been more like a hardware company, just focused on getting the hardware scale up. But now we're beginning to increasingly think about what the future can bring in terms of software and services. When it's just about hardware and we're building on top of Android, then we effectively outsource a lot of the safety and privacy issues to Google to handle. I think the big opportunity that we see is that we're on the brink of a change in the operating system that we all use on our devices, because now using LLMs, we can start making sense of all the information that exists on these really data-rich devices to then provide a hyper-personalized experience to each individual user, and hopefully soon remove the need of having apps. As we move towards and transition towards this future, we're going to start taking more of a leadership position in the industry on the software and services side. I think that's when these issues become really important. That's why I mentioned earlier that we should be leading with transparency, showing the user exactly what type of data we're collecting, when we're collecting it, when we're leveraging it, and allowing them granular access to deleting the stuff they don't want to share anymore. But at the same time, having the lines of communication open to let them understand what the benefit of having this data sharing is. What is the utility of it? So that's kind of how we're approaching it right now.
Thank you. Erin, closing remarks. You're going to do my work.
I'll do your work. I'll end with some algorithm food for thought, in that even 2 to 5 years ago, we would talk about algorithms in terms of the need for explainability and replicability, and those are both now pretty much obsolete. Because if I'm sitting next to you on my phone or computer and we type in the same search on the same app, we're gonna get different results because of this personalization of our relationship with an algorithm. And same time, same place, different results. Same time, different place, definitely different results. And it's taking into account thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of data points to serve you what it thinks you want. And so the idea of explainability and replicability doesn't process well. However, we do know that you can work with algorithmic systems, whether they're generative AI or not, on additive or negative work. So you can say, for safeguarding, if somebody's looking for this, that, or the other, I want to make sure this sort of verified information comes first. So you can be additive towards a system, or you can be negative towards a system, saying like, even if people are looking at this, here is the type of stuff that should not come up or be used for results. Either way, you need all the data beneath it to understand those prompts, but I think it means we have to think of what safety by design looks like in a different way for AI and large language models.
Thank you. And I think what we can say, we need agile, evolving collaboration between all the stakeholders to make sure that the digital spaces remain safe and secure for innovation to thrive. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please join me in thanking the panelists and the speakers for their ideas.